Hail and well met. I'm Rick, a historical person and your guide to the past. Today we're returning to medieval and early modern medicine, returning to thinking about the theories that people use to understand health and well-being. And if you haven't seen some of my other videos on the topics, you might want to check those out first, looking specifically at treating disease, particularly plague, and a focus on the Black Death of the 14th century and some of the cures that people attempted. But before we get into the past, a quick aside. So I feel like I've really got to apologise at this point. This video wasn't really originally planned to be part of this series. I was planning on doing a video on plagues and will get back to doing that. But this emerges from one of my my chat from the past talks with a group of brownies, and I did a small piece afterwards, which ended up being quite a big piece. And I thought it really deserved to be here rather than there. So if it's a little bit nonsensical and if it's all in my office, please do forgive me for that. Hopefully the next one will be somewhere a little bit more exotic. So we're going to talk about plagues, particularly the Black Death, but remember that this is just one really notable example, and violent disease, summer pestilences, they were a reality of life for people throughout the past, but particularly in the medieval and early modern period. Regardless of its presence, though, there were treatments and ways these diseases were understood. So let's speak to an expert and find out what those reasons were. Good day. You may well have heard of a terrible pestilence which is plaguing not only Britain or Europe, but the entire world. I do, of course, mean the Black Death. It is global. It reaches its peak in the middle of the 14th century here in Europe, between about 1347 and 1351, and somewhere between a third and a half of all the people that lived in Europe, some 30 or more million people, are going to die of it. Now, lots of different ideas as to how it came about, how it came to ravage the entire globe, but far more important to a physician such as myself is how to cure it. And we have many different options. For example, you might want to put something on the buboes. That seems reasonable, doesn't it? Buboes are great pus-filled boils, terrible things full of just vile smelling and just awful stuff, rather like a great big spot. Well, you could just let the pus out. Obviously that was also spreading poison around, but that could prove useful, and some surgeons will offer that service, and some people who have that service will recover, so perhaps it's a good service to have. I would suggest that you want to put something on it, and you may go very simply. Maybe you're not very wealthy and you want to use simply an onion. An onion rubbed on there may do good work, or you could use herbs, and particularly rosemary and sage are renowned for their healing abilities, and of course for smelling and tasting lovely. If you don't have any herbs or you can't get an onion, you could try poo. Now, ideally the poo of somebody that's already had the plague and has recovered, but almost anything terrible and smelly is going to be, well, worse than the terrible smelly things inside the buboes. And as we know, things are drawn to things that are like each other. That's why all of your friends are probably somewhat similar to you, have somewhat similar ideas. It's exactly the same with the poisons and the disease. So the terrible smelly poo should draw out the poison. You might prefer, rather than putting something on, to put something in. So you could try just drinking vinegar. Well, vinegar, we know, is good. It cleans things very well. You can clean up blood with it. You can make a kitchen nice and safe to cook in. And of course you can clean your insides, clean them full of, well, clean away all the plague. If you don't want to drink vinegar, you could just try 10-year-old treacle. That could be very good. There's a couple of potions actually. There's 4 Thieves vinegar. Now, this was invented by 4 lovely gentlemen, enterprising gentlemen, who thought all these sick people, the problem is that they've got too much stuff, so they would just come into their houses and help them by taking away their stuff, or robbing the sick and dead. But they didn't want to get sick themselves, so they mixed vinegar, or sometimes cider that had gone off, or sour wine with spices, particularly rosemary, cloves, sage, and of course wormwood, which is admittedly mildly poisonous. If you've got a bit more money, you might try theriac. Theriac is lots of different recipes. Some of them have up to 80 different things in them. It can be drank or it can be applied as a poultice. The important thing is that many of these ingredients are very, very expensive. You might try a bit of silver in there. Silver, as we know, is a pure metal, beloved by God, and that will sort you right out. And of course, you should put lots of opium in there. Opium is used particularly in the Dar al-Islam as a way of preventing pain. And there is a great deal of pain associated with the plague, so that makes some sense. Perhaps you prefer your science though. So the best thing, or one of the best things, is to take a small precious green stone, such as I have in my ring, an emerald, and grind it into a paste or a powder. Then put it into a goblet or a cup and add some wine, ideally spice wine, because it tastes better that way. You drink it down. Now your body cannot absorb the emerald, but what the emerald does, it is a clean and pure gemstone, and it will purge your body of all the poisons. It will suck it into itself so that when you poo out that emerald dust, it will poo out also all of the disease that is inside you. If you can't afford emerald, they are very expensive. Arsenic or mercury will do something very similar, though they don't taste as good and they are admittedly terribly poisonous. If you don't want to go that way, you can always use animals. Of course, animals are very useful and very helpful. So if you take something like this little chicken here, and you take a razor and you shave its bottom, you then put the bottom against the bubo, and it will allow the chicken to suck in all of the disease, all of the terrible, terrible poison inside the body. And either the chicken will die, and the patient hopefully will not, or the patient will die, or just the chicken will die. The chicken's not going to survive. Anyway, now when the chicken is dead, you're going to put it in the plague pit with everybody else. But remember, food prices get very, very expensive. There's fewer people to work the land, to grow crops, fewer people to transport it to the towns and the cities. So if you're very, very hungry and you haven't got enough food, and you see a perfectly good chicken going into a ditch, well, if you eat it, you might get sick, but if you don't eat it, you may well starve to death. I'll leave it to you to decide which is the worst fate. You can, of course, just try and clear the air. Much disease is caused by miasma, an evil smell, an invisible fog of vile pestilence. If you put the sweet-smelling herbs, the sage, the rosemary, and so forth, into a fire, and that smoke that should drive off the bad air. You use good air in place of bad air. That is, of course, expensive, so if you can't afford the herbs, you can't afford the firewood, you could just sit into an open sewer. Remember, there's very few underground sewers. Mostly it's just a channel in the middle of the street. Just sit inside there. That terrible smell, the worst smell, will drive off the slightly less bad smell. You can also just try fumigating your house. So if you can only afford some herbs, you set fire to them in a bowl and you waft that smoke around the sage and the rosemary, and hopefully that will do the job. You can, of course, pray. Praying is very good. You could go on pilgrimage. You could appeal to the Lord. You could get holy water from a blessed shrine and wash the patient with that. If you are particularly holy, you might take yourself a bundle of sticks and walk around smashing these sticks against your back and proclaiming your sinfulness, to purge yourself of sin and thus purge yourself of disease, to purge your poison, your communities of poison. That's called being a flagellant. That's not something that I would suggest. Many people choose to move. If you are wealthy, if you have places to go, people to move to, you can leave when pestilence comes into your area, and perhaps that will save you, or perhaps that will just spread it further. In some places they do the opposite though. If you go to Ragusa, you may know it as Dubrovnik, a Croatian town, but part of the Venetian Empire. They imposed a 30-day isolation period on any ship or traveller who came to the city. It was adopted more widely throughout the Italian republics or the city-states, but they adopted a 40-day period of isolation, which they called the quarantina. You may be familiar with that. Milan is a place that took it particularly seriously. They're said to have nailed some people up inside their houses to prevent them getting out and spreading disease, but they also, and much more humanely, built a place outside called the Pest House, and if you were sick you went there to get better, or not to get better. I mean, hopefully what that's told you is that we've got lots of different options, lots of different things that we're trying. It's a difficult period, a difficult disease to deal with, but we are doing our best. Phew. Well, if that doesn't make you glad to be living in a time where we understand much more about the bubonic plague and diseases more generally, and have treatments for such things as the Black Death, there are still outbreaks of this from time to time after all, well, I don't know what else will. I know I'm glad to be living today. I hope everything made sense, but if you'd like anything clarifying, got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. If there's anything more you'd like to know on this topic or another part of our shared past, again, let me know in the comments. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter and on Instagram. Meanwhile, if you liked this video, please like it. If you think it was interesting or useful or fun, please share it, and make sure you subscribe to join me for another trip into the past. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.